Well, it's the same story as last month. The inflation figures were out at 7 o'clock this morning, and once again, the markets, the city, the analysts are all shocked. Why? Because inflation didn't fall. And that's despite the fact that, of course, filling up the car is much cheaper than it was this time last year. That the rocketing food inflation was less than it had been the previous month. But it is the underlying core inflation that has caused the problem. Now, I have to say, I do hold the Governor of the Bank of England, Bailey, very responsible for this. He didn't even see it coming. And when it did appear, he said, don't worry your poor little heads. This will merely be transitory. And now we're ramping up interest rates. They will go up again tomorrow. It'll be the 13th rise in rates as they try to dampen it down. But nobody, of course, acknowledges at all that the massive increase in the money supply, years of quantitative easing, have anything to do with it. No, we can't say that. It reminds me of a comment I heard in 1980 from Enoch Powell, a very early monetarist, who said, inflation is a disease of money caused by government. And I believe that to be the case, except in this particular case, I think it's the Bank of England. Do you agree with me? Has the Bank of England blown it? Give me your thoughts. Farage at gbnews.com. Liam Halligan, GB News' economics and business editor, joins me. Liam, one of Rishi's big 5 pledges is that by Christmas, inflation will be down under 3%. Not going to happen, is it?
That quote you just gave, interestingly, Nigel, it echoed the words of a Nobel laureate economist, Milton Friedman, of course. Inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. Let's come on to quantitative easing, because I, like you, have been very critical of quantitative easing for many years. And just look at the numbers. 8.7% inflation today. In May, a huge surprise. Almost no one saw that coming. Inflation now is an outlier in the UK because Eurozone inflation is 6.1%, US inflation is 4%. So we do have the highest inflation by a long way in the G7. Food price inflation still above 18%, even though wholesale food prices have come down a lot. But as you say, it's core inflation. This is inflation when you strip out volatile things like food prices, energy prices, alcohol prices. Oh, not much fun for you.
Thank you.
Lots of things that are imported, so you strip out the exchange rate implications on inflation, and it's the underlying domestic price pressure from wage bargaining, from supply chains domestically, and indeed from monetary growth. And that core inflation went up from 6.8% in April to 7.1% in May. And let's have a quick look, before we talk about QE, at interest rates, where they're going to go tomorrow. We can see from this graph that the Bank of England kept interest rates ultra low 2017 all the way through to 2021. Then you had those 12 successive rises. That's why 5, 3 and 2-year mortgage deals, as they're now unwinding, people are having to remortgage at much, much higher rates. But the Bank of England tomorrow, it's nailed on. It's going to go from at least 4.5% base rate to 4.75, possibly even to 5%. The money markets are now saying there's a 50% chance that that will happen, a more radical interest rate rise to try and stamp down on inflation.
This, of course, impacts on people's lives in an enormous way, and we'll be in Barnsley doing a Farage at Large tomorrow night. You'll be with me, and we'll be talking to folk there about what this means for them. How responsible is the bank for all of this?
There are many reasons for this UK inflation. There's lockdown, of course, which caused huge inflation. Then on top of that, the war in Ukraine, though we must say UK inflation was a 30-year high even before Putin's invasion in February 2022. But for me, the issue that no mainstream commentators like talking about, certainly not members of the Monetary Policy Committee, oh no, it wouldn't be the done thing, chaps and chapesses, is the fact that we have massively expanded the central bank's balance sheet since 2009. Quantitative easing, an emergency measure which I agreed with in part at the beginning to stop the banking system collapsing, but the emergency measure became a lifestyle choice. It became crack cocaine of economics because it ramped up financial markets, and it meant governments could borrow cheaply.
What did it do? It made the rich richer.
It made the rich richer. OK, you had the...
Asset push inflation.
It was asset push inflation. It was a huge driver of wealth inequality. It pushed up house prices for people who had houses, made it more difficult for people who didn't. But we must distinguish, Nigel, between pre-COVID era QE from 2009 to 2019. That was £425 billion expansion of the Bank of England's balance sheet, basically creating money from nothing, digital money from nothing. But we did more QE during the 2 years of lockdown, Nigel, than we did during the previous 10 years. QE money printing funded furlough. It funded lockdown. It made that ridiculous policy, in my view, possible. And the post-COVID QE, Nigel, and this is what's barely acknowledged. I've made this point, many columns, parliamentary select committees. Post-COVID QE is more inflationary because the pre-COVID QE stayed inside the financial system. It went back to the central bank as the reserves of the banks that had sold the gilts to the central bank.
This was different,
Trust me, I know you get this, though it's complicated. But viewers and listeners should understand that post-COVID QE created by the Bank of England was paid directly to firms in C-bill loans and COVID recovery loans and to households in furlough. QE funded furlough, QE funded those C-bill loans, many of which, of course, haven't been recovered.
So government policy with the Bank of England has caused this problem. There's no doubt in my mind about that, nor in yours. And yet the Labour Party don't even challenge them on it.
Almost no mainstream politician talks about QE. One that did, to her credit, she didn't get much right, was Theresa May. She talked a bit about QE in one speech that she gave, and she was the Bank of England and the economics policy establishment. They came down on her like a ton of bricks.
Well, I knew she must have got something right. Liam, there's no prospect of this ending soon, is there?
Well, it will get worse before it gets better, both in terms of interest rates and mortgage pain. But look, I don't want to be completely alarmist here. I don't think the banks and the building societies are going to go quickly into repossession mode. This mortgage pain will be contained mainly to, I'm afraid, people in their 30s and 40s who have got high mortgage costs. And I do think the banks and the building societies will make it easy for people, extending mortgage durations and loans, moving people seamlessly from repayment mortgage onto interest-only mortgages for a while in order to keep these increases in monthly mortgage payments as low as they possibly can be.
But, Liam Halligan says, it'll get worse before it gets better. Thank you for joining me. See you in Barnsley tomorrow evening.